got to clock in. You got to clock in for Friday. Wake up. Wake up. I'm calling you out, internet. I'm calling you out. I'm calling you out. Need to make sure you're functioning. Why are you taking even longer than usual? Why are you doing that? There you go. There you go. You want to, yeah, you want the world to know. You want the world to know. And we are totally live. What's up, everybody? Welcome to Get Your News On with Ron. Happy Friday. I hope you are well. I hope you are safe. I hope you are staying home. I hope you are washing your hands. I hope you're doing all those things. It is Friday, April 3rd in this year of our quarantine Lord 2020. And we got a guest today. I'm really excited to talk to this guy. He is an anti-fracking activist, which is awesome. He was also part of the Youngstown Board of Education. And most recently, he is running for president. He is a candidate under the Green Party umbrella. Please welcome to the show, Mr. Dario Hunter. Dario, thanks for being here, man.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So good to see you. Good to talk to you. And by the way, I don't know if it'll pick up in the mic, but we were hearing it a little bit in the green room. There are birds outside of Dario's window. You can hear them a little bit. And that's just how, that just speaks to what an environmentalist you are. The birds, they just surround you. They're like, Dario's here. He's looking out for us. He's saying fracking wells, no thank you. It's not good for our air. It's not good for our water. He's looking out for us. We're going to chirp for him. You know, they appreciate you. Exactly. And even Lucy's calm. Even Lucy can sense it. She's chill right now. She's on my lap. She wants to say hello. So thanks for being here. So we'll get right into things with you because we actually had Howie Hawkins on the show yesterday. So it turns out this was a green week for me, where I'm talking to all the different green candidates. And the first thing that we brought up that I think is a great place to start is, of course, the Green New Deal, which now the idea of the Green New Deal is a common discussion in our politics. That wasn't the case until very recently. That is the case thanks to the Green Party. They've really pushed that for a long time now. So where are you at personally as far as your platform is concerned? Do you just embrace the same Green New Deal as the Howie Hawkins campaign, or is yours different? And if so, how?
I'm very supportive of the Green New Deal. However, it has to be pointed out to your listeners, especially, that when one says Green New Deal, there are actually Green New Deals, plural. It seems that everyone has their own version of it.
Sure.
We know the Democrats have their own version, which is very much watered down. When we talk about the Green New Deal, we have to focus on what exactly is affecting our environment the most. If you are offering a version of the Green New Deal that only focuses on, let's say, electrical utilities, such as home usage, then you're cutting out a massive source of carbon emission, which would be transportation. And I think the great part about the Green New Deal that our party offers as a whole is that it is very comprehensive, that it targets every aspect of carbon emissions and pollution to move us towards 100% renewable energy, while also providing for millions of jobs that will be a part of this mass mobilization. So I would say that in terms of my perspective on those issues, I would say that most candidates agree on including that as a part of the package. Our campaign, however, sees the Green New Deal as a part of a much larger environmental plan, which we call the Green Path Forward. We believe very strongly that you cannot solve the climate change problems and the environmental crises that we're facing by simply doing what happens between New Jersey and California. And this is unfortunately a very typical response in American politics. The idea that if we change or reshape something happening within our borders, it will change the entire world. There's something optimistic to be said about that, but it is also very American in its tendency to cut the rest of the world out. So what do we need to focus on in order to solve the environmental crises that we're facing? First and foremost, we need to have a diplomatic realignment. Many of the countries that are at the top of the list of carbon emissions are countries that, let's be frank, we're trained to hate. China, Russia. We've had strained relations with Iran for quite some time, and they're in the top 20 of carbon emissions. Unless we reshape and realign our diplomacy, which is a part of our campaign's larger plan to achieve peace internationally, it's going to be tough for us to be able to sit down at a table together and resolve the international climate change issues.
So you kind of draw a connection between world diplomacy and the Green New Deal.
Absolutely.
And then do you also draw the connection to jobs? Like, are you for a federal jobs guarantee?
Absolutely. I'm for guaranteed employment. I'm also for ensuring that workers have a living wage. And of course, living in Southern California, that's going to differ depending on which part of the country that you're living in. People are talking about $15 an hour. That is not going to cut it in Southern California. Good luck with that, even just barely making the rent. And so we need to have workers say in terms of cost of living adjustments and living wage. That's an important part of our platform, empowering communities and local control. But to expand a little further on the green path forward, we believe there are multiple environmental crises that we're facing. Yes, carbon emissions coming from transportation, coming from utilities, of course, that's a major issue. But we have to recognize the fact that we have an aggressive and rapacious agricultural industry that is also contributing negatively to climate change, that we have to reach peak meat by 2030 in order to make sure we have a decline in meat production and consumption because of that negative contribution to climate change, which is significant. We also have to ensure that we are ramping down plastic production and use and switching over to biodegradables where needed, because plastics from beginning to end throughout the entire life cycle are a major part of carbon emissions. And so what our campaign is about the big picture. We're not going to focus on just one piece of the environmental crisis we're facing, because it is multifaceted and it's affecting every part of the world. We must have a global approach to this, and we must recognize how it connects to every other aspect of our agenda, like spokes on a wheel. We just talked about workers' rights. We talked about living wages and jobs guarantees. These issues are all connected.
So, let's talk a little bit about you personally then. Let's switch gears for a minute. So you said, you told me off mic you became a rabbi, and that was a recent development.
Well, actually, becoming a rabbi wasn't a recent development, but I have most recently professionally served as a rabbi.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
I've actually worn a number of hats. I served as an environmental attorney. I've been an educator, which of course lends itself well to having served on a board of education. I was an educational administrator as well. So I've served in a number of different capacities that I think speak well of the kind of challenges that we are facing, because having dealt with environmental issues as an activist, having dealt with the educational system and the ways that it fails so many people in this country, particularly through the rampant environmental racism that leaves minorities behind in this country, I can say that I have addressed that and faced that firsthand, both from the school district management end of it, as well as an educator.
So let me ask you this: when you say environmental racism, because a lot of people, when you use that, they're just not even sure what that means exactly, and you really have to break it down, for a general person. So when you say environmental racism, what do you mean by that?
I'm referring to the fact that there is this feeling amongst the rather greedy and self-interested corporations and corporate magnates, this feeling that they can pollute certain parts of this country, certain neighborhoods, certain cities, because no one cares about them because of the color of the skin of the people who live there. And Youngstown, Ohio is a perfect example of that. I have many colleagues in leadership in that community who were they were so dismayed and disappointed at the ways in which things were being done there that you'd never be able to get away with in other parts of the country. And I don't know how much you know about what's been going on in Youngstown in that area. The whole region is part of this fracking boom. And the result of that has caused earthquakes in places like Youngstown to a magnitude that never happened before. Now, minor earthquakes happen in various parts of this country, almost imperceptible to people. But these earthquakes were definitely perceptible, and they were unprecedented. And it was a direct result of the fracking happening in that area. And having seen that, and having seen the massive amount of money put behind supporting the fracking in that community, they put obscene sums behind glossy mailers sent to every home saying, you must support this because otherwise these out-of-staters, these rabble-rousers who are trying to get rid of fracking are going to kill your jobs. And I knew that wasn't true because I knew the people behind the effort to end it. They were my neighbors. They were my friends. They just didn't want this in their backyard, and they had a right to. And I decided to be very active and vocal about that because it mattered to me and to my neighbors. Environmental racism is real. Educational racism, where they basically allow school districts, majority minority school districts, to fester an educational failure so they can send in corporate contractors who thrive off of the failure, that only make money when they're failing. This kind of a predatory circumstance is very real, and it happened to the district I served when they took away local control and instituted a pernicious state takeover for profit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and I do know, I do have some firsthand experience with what you're talking about. I'm from Pittsburgh originally, yep. And you know, I say, even still, when you see, because when I went to graduate school in Pittsburgh, and I did a media ecology study just on the entire fracking industry, and because they've just bought up so many buildings, so many companies, so they've bought up the local media. You know, you don't hear about the, well, when I did my study in 2011, you didn't hear about the 2,800 environmental violations they committed. And that's just skimming the surface. You know, and even to this day, when you're driving from the Pittsburgh airport, whenever I fly in to visit my folks or whatever, because my family's still there, you know, you'll see a sign sponsored by Range Resources against littering. Range Resources, they care about the environment. They don't want you to litter, which I always say, you know, having Range Resources, having an anti-littering sign, that's like Joe Biden having a sign against catcalling or something like that. But so, yeah, I'm familiar with what you're talking about. And so are you from Youngstown originally?
I'm originally from Newark and Jersey City, New Jersey. Life for me started out in Newark, New Jersey, in the projects. Most of my childhood was just across the river in Jersey City. And we're talking about two communities that when I was a kid, you know, I lived in rather slum-like circumstances. Jersey City, definitely. It's now very much a bedroom community for Manhattan. It took many decades of real estate speculation, but it certainly wasn't that when I was a kid.
Okay. So how'd you end up in Youngstown? What happened there?
Well, I did what, in effect, my father did. My father decided that he didn't want to live in the projects anymore and bought what was a rundown home in Jersey City, New Jersey, and lovingly renovated it. And decades passed, and of course, as I mentioned, the neighborhood changed. But I decided at one point to move to Youngstown, Ohio, and to buy a home in an area where there are, unfortunately, many, many abandoned homes. The story of Youngstown is very much tied to the wind down of the steel industry there.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people left, just abandoned their homes, and there are neighborhoods that are just dotted with those abandoned homes and with urban blight. I bought a home on the south side, lovingly renovated it, and got very much active and engaged in my community. I created a nonprofit, the 6 Word Citizens Coalition, to improve quality of life on the South Side, which is one of the hardest hit neighborhoods of Youngstown in terms of crime and blight. And that was part of how I got engaged later on in the school board. Because for me, as someone whose personal come up was education, you know, I saw everything around me in Jersey and said, you know, how do you get out of this? How do you move past what you're seeing around you? And for me, the answer was keeping my head in a book. I worked my way through that into Princeton, through 3 law degrees. And so what was readily apparent to me was the fact that—
Why do you need 3 of them?
Well, I did a joint U.S.-Canada law program because I wanted to hedge my bets and be able to practice on both sides of the border. So I have a Canadian degree and an American degree. And then I decided to go back for a master's in law at Wayne State in labor and employment law. And I'm very glad that I did, because it informs very much my activism and the work that I do on behalf of workers' rights. It was also very helpful in the Board of Education in a managerial sense.
So how is like a master's in law different than just like a JD or like a law degree?
Yeah, it's a little bit tough to understand because the JD, which is a doctorate, it is a professional doctorate. The next step above that is a master's, and most people think, what? That doesn't make any sense.
So it's backwards compared to every other. I never knew that. I honestly never knew that.
Well, it has to do with the fact that JD was originally an LLB, a Bachelor of Laws. And in some countries it still is. In Canada, when I did the joint US-Canada program, that's what it was. It was a Bachelor of Laws. They're moving to the JD system like us as well. Instead of being a Bachelor of Laws, it is a JD. Under the LLB system, Bachelor of Laws system, it makes sense that the next progression is a master's. And then beyond that would be a PhD in law or an SJD in law, which would be a genuine research doctorate, as distinguished from a professional doctorate like an MD, which is what a JD is.
Dario, I think you're making all this up. No, I'm just kidding. No, I honestly, I never knew that. And I mean, hey, man, I've spent some time in the academy too. I got an MA and was thinking about going on for the PhD, decided not to. But yeah, I always thought it was just law school was law school. I didn't know there were like so many distinguishing things. All right, so you got your degrees. When did you decide to get involved with the Green Party?
Well, I decided to get involved with the Green Party in 2018. In Ohio, you can't really change your party registration until the next primary. Laws differ from state to state. So I took a green ballot at that time, and that made me a member of the Ohio Green Party. And the impetus for that was just looking around and understanding that as much as I was devoted to this fight for education for all, for ending environmental hazards and environmental racism, just fracking, the one party town that I lived in, Youngstown, which was dominated by the Democratic Party, wasn't interested in addressing any of those issues to the benefit of Youngstown citizens. They had deeply entrenched corporate interest. And I found myself actively fighting them, eventually even suing the local Democratic Party. And
oh, wow. What happened there? Oh, hey, there you are. We just lost you for a split second.
Oh, okay. Glad to be back.
Good to have you back. So you cut out when you said that the Democratic Party had a lot of corporate interest and you were fighting them there.
Yes. So it made it very apparent to me just the texture, shape, and hue of the corporatist duopoly. The great thing about the Green Party is that the Green Party is not corporately co-opted. It doesn't accept corporate money. It's about people power. And the values that the Green Party advances, I believe strongly that most Americans agree with. If you have a conversation with most Americans about the direction this country is taking and where it should be headed, they, for the most part, agree with the values that we're putting forward because they are people-centered. And it's something that people don't see much in the politics that we're witnessing around us, especially in the midst of this crisis that we're in right now.
Well, I think in particular in the Youngstown area and in the Pittsburgh area, and I can speak more to Pittsburgh than I can for Youngstown. I mean, I don't know if you ever went to Mojo's, but I used to perform at Mojo's. I'm a stand-up, but I know that that area, it's very much like what's commonly described as just like blue dog Democrat, where it's just like, they want you to be for the working class, but if you want to kind of take it a step further and really talk about the environment and stuff like that, well, they get kind of scared because then it's like, people get worried that you're going to take jobs away or something like that. And I think the big challenge is to really just drive home the idea that it's like, no, this is about the working class and the jobs of the future. This is about the jobs that we need because the way that we've been doing things for all these years, it's not working anymore. Would you agree with that?
I would say that particular slant on the focus on the issues, I think that's a bit more for the Youngstown area, a suburbanite perspective and point of view. I think if you're deep in the midst of the city of Youngstown proper, because a lot of people say that they're from Youngstown, but they may be from Boardman or Struthers or surrounding suburbs that experienced a bit of white flight in the past number of decades. If you're from, let's say, the south side of Youngstown, you have some serious and immediate pressing issues, like the fact that your kid goes to school and doesn't have any textbooks to take home because there are no materials. You have to deal with the fact that there is crime and blight all around you. You have to deal with the fact that you are festering in the midst of the environmental racism, smack dab in the middle of the city in many regards. And so, yes, jobs. Everyone is concerned about bringing jobs back, but there's also the side-eyed view from people in the city of Youngstown that, okay, this next project that you say you're bringing in that has brought in gifts and prizes for all of the local politicians but hasn't developed any jobs, what is that boondoggle about? They're tired of the trickery. They're tired of the fakery. They're tired of the illusory promises that really just line the pockets of local politicians and don't bring any benefit back to the area. And so, yes, you have blue-collar workers who work, for instance, at the local GM plant in Lordstown, who are deeply worried about what happens next because they've lost their jobs. But the texture and the shape of their concerns isn't exactly the same as the concerns of, say, an African-American citizen in the city of Youngstown on the South Side. Because unfortunately, and this is what our campaign tries to bring home, the inequality affects different people, different groups differently. So there are multiple conversations and multiple facets to be had.
The birds were really excited about that answer. They really, the birds really appreciated that one. So getting kind of more national here, you know, the way I see it is like we're at a point where, you know, 2020 is very significant for the Green Party because you're going to be facing one or two scenarios here. One, you know, Bernie Sanders is the nominee for the Democratic Party, in which case you have what I would see as a bigger ally to the Greens than we've ever seen, you know, potentially for the White House, definitely in my lifetime, possibly ever. Another scenario, you have Joe Biden versus Donald Trump, where you have two absolutely horrific choices, and you're going to have a new group of people. You already have it, but you're going to have a new group of people who are kind of looking around going, where do I go? And they're going to be looking for the answer. So how would you say you drive home the message that the Green Party is that answer that they're looking for? You know, we live in a country now where to the millennials and to Gen Z, you know, socialism isn't a bad word anymore. We're getting away from those stigmas. So how do you really, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it, bring more people into that fold on the electoral end of things?
There are multiple sides to this. There is the messaging, of course, but there's also the strategy and the footwork. I would say messaging-wise, our campaign has a very strong and focused message that drives home how comprehensive our values and our platform are. I believe in the statement that we're the party of justice for the earth and for all of its people. And so we have this full-throated environmental platform, and we've discussed the Green New Deal, we've discussed our green path forward and the many ways in which we're going to ensure for environmental sustainability and stability. But people are hurting. People are hurting all across this country. And when I campaign for the Green Party, if I'm in a line of early voters in Youngstown, Ohio, and I'm talking to someone who just lost their job at a GM plant, they're not sure how to help their kids with their homework. The kids don't have materials to even bring home. They've got all sorts of multifaceted real world issues. The first thing I'm going to say to them is not going to be, hey, have you heard about the Green New Deal? Yes, we're going to talk about that, but it's not at the heart of what they're facing. And what has to be recognized is that there are multiple conversations to be had. And first and foremost, there are multiple opportunities to listen, to be taken advantage of. People want to be heard desperately, and they're looking for a populist candidate that makes them feel heard. What we have is the perfect marriage of a responsive party, a listening party, along with an actual platform that's going to solve their problems. And so we offer uniquely, our campaign offers things like the People of Color Bill of Rights, which is an emphasis on the gap between the rights we're said to have in this country and the experience of millions and millions of this country's minorities, tackling the deficit in terms of justice in this country, ensuring community control of police and reform of our justice system, banning private prisons, dealing with the fact that so many urban areas have been cheated out of local control and say in education, ensuring that we have equality, equity in terms of banking and financial systems access for people of color. We have so many issues to deal with and to tackle. The stories I hear in the campaign trail, the tear-filled stories about night raids that have come and taken people's loved ones because they do not have documentation. Documentation or no, they're human beings and they deserve to be treated that way. All of these stories make up the essence of what our campaign is about, our people-centered focus. And so, yes, we're about the environment, but we're about people first and foremost, all living things first and foremost. We're about an agenda that advances the progress of our society. So that has to be emphasized. In terms of organizing, I was a local leader for the Youngstown Area Green Party, for the Mahoning Valley Green Party. And one of the things that I noticed around me, to be blunt, was that there weren't many other people who looked like me. I looked around the table and it was mostly the same people who've been doing the same activism for decades and decades on end, roughly the same age range, the same demographics. And that's not a slight against any of them. They were active in those causes and they contributed positively to those causes. But we definitely need to engage in some outreach and out of the box thinking. You know, I'm the only person running in this race who has held elected office, who has run for and won elected office as a write-in, in fact. And one of the things I learned in making that happen was you have to get out there and be where people are and connect with them. They're not just going to come to you. You need to show them that you're engaged with them and the causes and the community engagements that are important to them. So even though I'm a rabbi and I'm Jewish, I would go to local Black churches. And I would wait for the time when they would announce the local visitors, and I would say, "Hi, my name is Dario Hunter, and I'm representing, you know, whatever the organization would be," and have these breakout conversations with people afterwards. So as a party, we need to be where people are. We need to connect with all these different causes that may not be political or partisan or willing to endorse us as a party, but are traveling in the same direction in progress, in moving the discussion and the agenda forward. And that's how we're going to bring people in. So I think those organizational steps are absolutely necessary. I think you're not going to just having a polished message is not going to cut through all of the noise and all of the ways the deck is stacked against us money-wise if you're not out there and connecting with the people.
So what is your plan to switch gears here and get back to policy a little bit? What is your plan for healthcare?
I'm a strong believer in Medicare for all. I think that if we had had that going into this crisis, the shape of this would definitely be different. We've been witnessing for quite some time the gouging of the American public in terms of healthcare costs. One of those areas is in regards to big pharma. I definitely believe that we have to nationalize big pharma. We have to ensure that medical supply and pharmaceuticals are a part of this national healthcare system. And we have to ensure that there's equal access for all. Now, when I say that, I have to point out the fact that having lived on the south side of Youngstown, having lived in a place like Jersey City as a kid, you know, the places that are often left behind are places where there's predominantly people of color and rural areas when it comes to healthcare access. In Ohio, that's a big issue. And so we can't just talk about giving everyone a shiny new healthcare card, so to speak, but not ensuring that there's actual access in communities. So we need to invest in clinics and hospitals in these communities that are underserved. We need to invest also in healthy food in areas that have become food deserts. You can't talk about improving healthcare when there isn't access to healthy food. The neighborhood I lived in Youngstown, that ward of the city did not have a supermarket. If you were purchasing food within the boundaries of that ward of Youngstown, Ohio, you were probably purchasing various kinds of unhealthy food from Family Dollar or Dollar General or a gas station. You have to consider that in a broader scope of improving the health and access to health care for the American public. You have to consider that. And so we want to expand programs that ensure access to healthy food, to fresh produce. And we want to ensure that there's a wider spread of access to hospitals and clinics, whether we're talking about underserved urban areas or underserved rural areas. That's a big part of the picture.
What qualifies a food desert?
If we're talking about a food desert, there are various ways in which you can be a food desert. It doesn't mean that you don't have food available.
Right.
It means that you don't have essentials like fresh produce available. In a place like the Sixth Ward of Youngstown, you can access food. There are things you can purchase at your local gas station. There are things you can purchase at Family Dollar. If your diet consists of eating, no offense to this particular product, Top Ramen or Doritos, if that is what your diet consists of, that is not a healthy diet. I think everyone would acknowledge that. Those are, quote unquote, sometimes foods. If you can't access fresh produce, if you can't access the basic building blocks of having a healthy diet, then you live in a food desert. It doesn't mean that you're living somewhere that, period, doesn't have food. It means you're not able to access a healthy diet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I think that's another common misconception like some people will have where they're just like, what do you mean food desert? McDonald's is right there. And it's like, no, that's not that's not what this is about. So what do you see? And we talked about this when you were talking about, reaching out to communities and kind of building the organization. But I want to get a little more specific here. As far as younger people, in college, maybe people, that are just entering voting age for the first time and are kind of looking around thinking, what's going on here? How do you really get them to say yes to the Green Party?
Mm-hmm. As I mentioned, what we're offering is really a platform that speaks well to every aspect of society, and particularly young people. And I would say that because many of the things that we're addressing for the younger generations, for millennials and younger, and I happen to be a millennial, just on the edge of that.
Me too.
These are issues that we feel should have been dealt with a long time ago. We're tired of hearing older generations hem and haw and debate things that ought to be considered basic, like healthcare for all. And so I think one of the ways that you bring young people in is recognizing and understanding that feeling and that energy is there, and that they're willing to be on board if you're willing to show and demonstrate that you are going to be proactive and that you're going to be full-throated in support and defense of these causes. Because what they are seeing from the Democratic Party is not that. What they are seeing is a party that, because of the corporate interests that own them, are willing to sell out large parts of an agenda that younger generations pretty much already decided this is the direction we need to be moving in. But they're willing to sell those out for profit, for greed, and the Green Party is not, because we're not owned. And so we need to engage in that outreach and connect with them on those issues, be it healthcare or issues related to rent control, workers' rights, immigration. Younger generations are not interested in the racism of past generations on issues such as immigration in this country. They're not interested in perpetuating this sense that we need to target undocumented people. And so the conversations that we have with them need to be about how we move forward on tearing down that agenda of dividing people. And they're open to it. I've done many events in which that's been demonstrated. I did a great teach-in event at Kent State University some months ago about issues related to war and peace, particularly about the conflict in Israel-Palestine. And the receptiveness is there. The platform is there. The Green Party needs to just do the footwork.
So there's so many things set up, in our electoral system, our political system, to make sure that the two-party duopoly, which is really just one party and it's the money party, stays in place. There are so many mechanisms out there to stifle any third-party attempts. How do we overcome that?
We're seeing the tremors that are hopefully going to bring down the walls of that system as we speak. And this is a great segue from talking about young people, because they get it and are energized about things like ranked choice voting. And we're seeing that in the movements that are developing in various states. In Maine, for instance, they're motivated to make this happen because they know that this is a part of dealing with we call a democratic deficit. And I believe strongly that a lot of the issues that we're facing, for the most part, are like spokes on a wheel emanating from the central issue of the democratic deficit. The gap between the American public and actual control and power. That is how this system is able to abuse the public. So how do we get that back? Ranked choice voting gives increased choice, popular representation, taking money, corporate money out of politics and ending corporate personhood and having public only financing. These are the ways in which we can bridge that gap and seek to end the democratic deficit. And I would say the money part is a big, big part of that, because that's a big hurdle for parties like ours in terms of getting the message out. When they can pump massive amounts of money into their campaigns and just basically steamroller over any other comers, any other candidates and their ideas, that's a problem for democracy. And we recognize that. And I think the American public as a whole recognizes that. What we need to do is to coalesce around a movement to make that change happen. And with ranked choice voting, thankfully, we're seeing that. We're going to be a part of the progress of actions in terms of bringing forward ranked choice voting all across this country.
So my governor, Gavin Newsom, who is always looking out for my best interest and would never lie to me, he said that ranked choice voting is just too complicated. I mean, if you look at our system now, it is incredibly simple. You know, stuff like gerrymandering, the electoral college, you know, the way the polls work, it is very, very simple. I mean, it's just so whenever I go to vote, I'm like, I can't get over how simple and perfect this entire process is. So how do we combat that very compelling argument that ranked choice voting is just too complicated?
It's not. It's been done, and the sky didn't fall down. And the only thing that's complicated about ranked choice voting is that the complication for him and for politicians like him is that the private interest dumping money directly into his pocket is just a more simpler way of viewing democracy. And I can see how that's a simpler way of viewing democracy. Corporations plus politicians equal shady profits. I get that, but that's coming to an end. And that's what they're afraid of. The complication is just, the word is just a euphemism for you're messing up my program and I've been making good money. So shh, don't do that. Don't do that. You're making the block hot. I'm making good money. This hustle is a good hustle and you're ruining it. And yeah, we're bringing that hustle to an end. In multiple ways, we're bringing that hustle to an end. And they're afraid and they're scared and they're trying to trick the public by making it seem like the system is more complicated. It's not complicated. It's been done. People are doing it. They get it. They enjoy the added democratic choice. And we're bringing it everywhere.
I think we got to rename the whole thing a democratic desert, because I think that's what we're in. It's not just it's not a democratic deficit. It's a democratic desert. There is no democracy.
You're right. You're right. It's an illusion. It's an illusion, and it's an illusion and delusion of inclusion.
I like that. Delusion of inclusion. Welcome to the democratic desert. We got to co-author something, man. This is a book waiting to happen. You got 3 law degrees. I got a really patient cat. We can do this.
There you go.
So one of the things that a couple listeners requested was they wanted me to ask you about your take on Julian Assange. And so I'm going to ask you about Julian Assange, and I'm going to say you can also use this question to just talk about press freedom in general as well, if you'd like.
And thank you for connecting that to press freedom in general, because that is an essential part of what we're talking about when we're talking about Julian Assange. We're talking about an assault on press freedoms. Framing is important here, and something that the corporatist, colonialist, imperialist system loves to do is to base its arguments on reframing things and redefining things so they can then tear it down. They want to define Julian Assange in a certain way. I'm not going to acknowledge that, because I know that Julian Assange is a part of the larger effort to get out in the press certain truths that need to be made public. He's a part of that journalistic freedom that we need to have a genuinely free society. And they are torturing. They have tortured and are torturing that man because of it. And it is a multi-state action against him, but it's clearly motivated by the United States. The charges that they've trumped up against him are absolutely bogus. It's been acknowledged by other journalists that the things that he's done are things that they may have done in the course of securing information and sources and making information available to the public. He should be considered a part of that general journalistic freedom that a free society deserves to have. Instead, he has been tortured. And one of the things that sticks out to me, because law is my area and international law is of personal interest to me. I worked in environmental law, but also in immigration law and issues that relate to cross-border legal issues. It was very remarkable to me how this man who was in the Ecuadorian embassy was a citizen of Ecuador. Suddenly, when a new administration that's aligned with the US and its nefarious actions comes into power, suddenly his Ecuadorian citizenship evaporates into thin air, and they drag him out of the embassy. This is a massive violation of international law. You have a right to a nationality and to not be deprived of it unduly. They didn't give him any due process whatsoever. They just disappeared his nationality as an Ecuadorian and then had him pulled out of the embassy. These are things that should shock the conscience. And so I'm very much a part of the Free Assange movement. I'm very much full-throated in defense of journalistic freedom, including his journalistic freedoms. And I think that the people who have tortured him really need to answer for it. Those are the criminals, the people who have gotten together to torture that journalist.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting because of all the misinformation that the corporate media spews. You have a lot of people that aren't making, you brought how these charges are just completely bogus. There's the connection, too, between the reason they're doing what they're doing to Chelsea Manning now is because they want to get a false confession out of her. Because I think they know how bogus this all is, but they want to come down on Julian Assange. So, well, if they can get Chelsea Manning to say that he helped her hack stuff, well, then there's our smoking gun that we can try to point to. They're not getting this false confession out of her, so they're torturing her too, which they're able to do because Obama didn't actually pardon her. He just commuted her sentence.
Exactly. And the thing is, we're talking about these two particular persons. And me mentioning what I'm about to say doesn't in any way lessen what they've gone through or the focus we should have on them. But these are a couple of persons out of many. And it's great that we're talking about them because it allows us to talk about the larger issue of journalistic freedom, of the many ways in which imperialist colonialist countries like the US torture people who make essential truths that the public needs to know public. And it says to us as a society that we really need to make our sense of what democracy is more robust. If you think that showing up at the polls at a very tightly controlled and stage managed and corporately co-opted election every once in a while means that you have a democracy, even though there's no genuine press freedom, then you're sadly mistaken. We are in the process of building a democracy because what we have at present does not measure up. And the Assange case, the Chelsea Manning case, draws a bold underline underneath that.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things like first of all, in the World Press Freedom Index, we're not even in the top 50, 50. We're not even in the top 50. And I actually think we deserve to be even lower. But, it's one of those things like if other countries, which of course other countries have assaults against press freedom all the time. I'm not suggesting that they don't, but if other countries did what we did, we'd use that as a reason to bomb them.
Yeah, and speaking of that, it's always interesting when this country uses some kind of human rights argument for engaging in the unconscionable act of war against another country, when this country is one of the greatest human rights abusers in the world. Right now, over time, we're talking about countries that we're dealing with like Iran, where the US got actively engaged to squash democracy in Iran and then wags its finger at Iran for alleged human rights abuses while they're strangling the country to death with its sanctions in the middle of a global crisis. It's so galling. And as a candidate for president, as a Green, my focus has to be that. My focus has to be on calling that out and in building a structure that's going to allow us to be a positive force for good, for peace, for togetherness in the world. And that begins with ending the imperialism, the colonialism, ending the military-industrial complex, bringing the big tent down on this ongoing series of wars this country engages in for profit that's causing misery across the world, ending sanctions like the sanctions happening in Iran, sanctions against Cuba. This is how we're going to build a more peaceful and a safer world.
Thank you. So where can people learn more about you?
You can learn more about my campaign at DarioHunter.com. Please feel free to connect with us, join our sign-up list. And I wish that money weren't involved in politics, but in this election, as it happens, it currently is. So you can also donate on the website.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for talking to me, Dario. Really appreciate it.
And thank you for having me.
Cheers, man. All right, that was Dario Hunter. So Everything Revolution, what's his thoughts in uniting left-wing and right-wing people? I think he's really trying to bring coalitions together. Mr. Broken Oz, please ask Dario about Julian Assange. He is hyper-articulate and well-educated on the subject. He was on the Free Assange visual and was wonderful. Got that in for you. And I thought his answer was really great. Hope you did as well. Thank you very much, Everything Revolution. Thank you very much, Mr. Broken Oz. Guys, if you're looking for something to do Saturday, Graham Elwood and I have a show that's tomorrow. Yeah, tomorrow, Saturday. Tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, 2 p.m. Pacific Time, over on Zoom. You can get your tickets at my website, ronplacone.com. Once you sign up, we'll send a Zoom link to your email about an hour before showtime, and that's how you can participate in that event. It's only $5. So if you're looking for something fun to do Saturday, please do consider it. In the meantime, you guys know the drill. It's been a fun Friday. DarioHunter.com to learn more about Dario. Patreon.com/Ron Placone if you want to have a bunch of exclusive content and help keep this show afloat. Patreon.com/Ron Placone. Dario Hunter to learn more about Dario. Have a great weekend. And in the meantime, you know the drill. Lucy says meow. I say peace. Peace.